Hey everybody, you're listening to Beyond Recognition. Before getting into the next episode, I just wanted to thank everybody for the positive feedback. Thank you all who listened to the first episode of the podcast, made comments, and subscribed to our YouTube channel. I was shocked, for the lack of a better word, with the reaction, including us entering the iTunes charts in several countries. So thanks everybody who has checked us out. As some of you might know, I've been seriously sick over the last few months of the summer, and it took me a while to get back to work. Right now, I'm finally back on my feet and is ready to rock. We have a few wonderful conversations coming out. And if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time, my name is Dan, and I'm the host of Beyond Recognition, and your personal guide exploring various forms of creativity. Before getting into the new episode, check our Patreon page, patreon.com/beyondrecognition, where you could get the early access to the upcoming episodes and lots of cool stuff coming up. This is the episode 2, and my guest today is JOHN WRIGHT, the founding member of NoMeansNo and the Henson brothers. Recently, John got back to playing with his new project, Dad Bob. I got the chance to talk to John before he would get on his first tour since 2013. In this episode of Beyond Recognition, we're discussing punk rock, conducting music, and musical language, alternative tentacles living in Canada, and comfort zone. So tune in and listen to our conversation with JOHN WRIGHT. It took people several decades to realize that if you are an artist creating something in a specific niche or field, these aspects put certain limitations on you. And musically speaking, sometimes choosing a certain style literally means choosing the way of living, which is true for a lot of genres, but more significant with punk rock. How do you see these aspects being a punk rock musician?
Well, punk rock was what inspired me and my brother, Rob, to actually be a band and make music. And it was punk rock in the late 70s was so fresh and so exciting and so energetic. It was very attractive in that way, other than the mainstream music was rather boring and all hierarchical. How do you say that? Hierarchical. See, my English no good, but uh, and it's all just kind of glitz and showbiz and stupidity and I and so but the sort of ethos in the small scene that we grew up in Victoria, British Columbia, was essentially do what you want, and it was very inclusive, certainly at the beginning. Punk rock evolved into bands became pigeonholed. They became a type of punk rock band, a type of hardcore band, and that's kind of the inevitable evolution of music as it becomes more commercialized and popular and whatnot. But we started out with that, okay, this it's anything goes, and it was all just about playing loud and hard and honestly, and when Robbie and I began playing together, it was just him on bass and me on drums, so we had no choice. Well, we were different for for no other reason than that, and wrote songs that suited just bass and drums. It's not that we planned to be that way forever, but that's just was the nature of how things got started. And so my approach to music, having my brother being 8 years older than me, growing up from the 60s and 70s and all the various forms of rock, and he got very much into jazz and blah, 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 blah. And I went through school learning to play drums and learned, so I was exposed, of course, to concert music and then a jazz band. And I was taught from very beginning to play with traditional grip on my drums. So all of this is part of what forms our musical lexicon. And although punk rock was the inspiration, there's plenty of other music out there, plenty of other sounds, plenty of other ways of arranging and expressing. And so we never really kind of fell into that into those genres or those being very specific type of band. And for me, I never wanted to be. It was always about just where can music go. But the bottom line was that it was you're playing honestly from your heart and playing hard and putting your energy in. Even if the songs aren't screaming loud fast, they can be, but even if they aren't, they're still honest and energetic.
I'm always amazed to an extreme degree when these, we were talking about in the context of punk rock, when some of the artists channels their influences not from, let's say, a jazz drummer like Roy Haynes or Billy Coham or anybody else, but channeling these ethics into your style of play, which is probably it would be good to provide an example. A friend of mine, he's an iconic drummer from the 90s, and he's well known for putting the snare drum like below his knees, like, almost, down to the ground, which is, a lot of the people really can't play in this way, but he somehow found it, which is also, you understand, from the practical standpoint, it affects your physicality, expressivity in a lot of different ways.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I've always approached, because I guess, my first learning to play the drum set, for instance, was all sort of that quasi big band school stage band stuff. And you approach jazz drumming entirely different than approaching rock and roll drumming. I've discovered over my life, and now especially with Dead Bob, that really my strength as a musician is an arrangement, and I've always been that's been what's behind all of my decisions musically, is how things are arranged. And in that context, I play the drum set more as a musical instrument than as a beatbox. But of course, I'm pounding away playing punk rock or rock and roll or whatever. But within that pounding, I'm always listening to how the drums sound and why I am hitting this tom at this time, and why this fill is the fill I will put in. Rather, you know what I mean? Like, the scope is larger than the simple formats behind rock and roll drumming.
It's very interesting because I've always been like listening to your interplay with Rob, which is obviously a notable part of your music. I've been thinking about like how these two people, being brothers, found their musical language. While what you're talking about is much more about the compositional factor, which is also what I'm talking about. In terms of the conducting music and how parts are written, or there were also some aspects of like the feel of the music.
Oh yeah, and yes, of course, my brother and I, maybe not so much because we're brothers, but of course that's something about it, and that we fell into playing music together for more or less the same reasons. Not completely, really. I mean, we're different people, but I mean, put it this way: if you were the amount of time that my brother and I have been in a room playing music together, and if you would imagine that was the tens of thousands of hours of having a conversation with one person, eventually you're going to know what they're going to say.
Yeah.
Pretty much. There will be no surprises, You'll already know what's going to come out of their mouth. And that's just the nature of interacting so closely for so long, for so many hours, countless. And, a lot of musicians are good musicians and they play with a lot of different people, but they don't necessarily play with the same people for so long. Some do, some don't. But that in itself, that conversation then becomes its own entity, which is what you're saying about the connecting on a musical language. It's inevitable that would happen. And when Andy came into the band, it was like someone who had something very interesting to add to that conversation, and then became a three-way conversation. But and I don't mean to say but once those numbers start to, when you start adding voices, eventually it becomes harder to become one singular thing. And of course, it can be done. Everyone has to take a different role. So three-piece rock and roll seemed to me like the perfect combination. That you will have all the elements that you need for rock and roll. And if the three people are able to bring how should I say this, when it's working, when everybody brings the components that are needed to create a beautiful dish, like tomatoes and bocconcini or something, that's like the perfect three, then that's when the magic happens. And it really was a long process. Like and being in Victoria, it was, we simmered for a long time before anybody even really saw us outside of Victoria. Years and years of being a band and playing shows locally, friends, and maybe to Vancouver and whatnot. So when we did start venturing out, we were already a thing, and then it just grew from there.
To draw the parallel between NoMeansNo of that era and this, let's say, that evolution that was brought by Andy joining the band, because obviously the collaborative part is an important aspect in what you're doing with Dead Bob. As far as I'm concerned, you've done most of this project remotely. So it's also interesting, like when you have these very different people who take your music, and there are lots of different ways of them interpreting what you are doing musically that you can't really control, but you can just rely on them. And I really think that it's one of these beautiful moments of creating something with like-minded people.
Oh yeah, yes. And Dead Bob now, fast forward 30 more plus years, is really a very different, as you were saying. Basically, I've created this, and then any other creation was not necessarily totally remotely, but yes, this is not a project of two or three people coming together and forming a new entity, i.e., Dead Bob. This is a much different approach to music, and an interesting one for me, in the sense that when you're creating music by yourself, obviously there's nobody else there with any input, and you're not, like, I'm bass, drums, guitar, so we're writing songs for bass, drums, guitar. The palette is there's blank slate, go. And having years and years of writing and arranging, and lots of ideas that were never part of I never were not part of NoMeansNo. Just songs and ideas that I would put together in demos that were in all sorts of various forms of completion, mostly not complete at all. And then, NoMeansNo is done, and I'm not touring, and I'm doing other things with my life. But I can revisit music from an entirely personal point of view, which is not a collaborative one. And the whole fact that Dead Bob is a record and Dead Bob is a band is entirely by accident. Not by accident, but by circumstance. I went on to own a pub here in Powell River in British Columbia that completely absorbed my life, and I wanted it to end up being a brew pub, and I've been brewing beer for well over 30 years as well. And I thought, that's how I'm going to live out my days. I'm going to become go from an amateur brewer to a professional one, and just make beer and live in London. That didn't happen for all sorts of reasons. And COVID, like so many artists and so many people, they just have a lot of time on their hands. It was no different for me. And I was out here, and I built myself a workshop, because I like to muck around with wood and build things. And then I realized I could set my drums up here. I haven't had my drum set up where I lived since like 1985. Well, maybe no, 1 year in Vancouver. In Vancouver, my drum set was in my basement for 1 year in like 1994. Other than that, it was in a practice space. I went and worked on music, and then came home, which was, of course, not the original way. Robbie and I were, ensconced in my parents' basement, working diligently away on music. But since 1985, that didn't exist anymore. It was a much more, well, whatever. We had practice spaces, and we got together and blah blah blah. So I had my drums. In COVID, I had time, and it's like, oh, I'm gonna revisit all these songs, and it's just on my own. And I want to finish some of this stuff, so it's done, and I can put it aside and know I completed that, and I can do what I want. It doesn't matter what the instrumentation is, and it was a lot of fun. Now, but when the pub finally did sink, and I found myself with no future in brewing, likely. Who knows? You never know what'll come around the corner. Decided I wanted to self-release this because there was a lot of NoMeansNo fans out there that I knew would be happy. And when I said I was going to do it, it was a huge response. And it was like, okay, let's just put some music out. But then it became, well, I've got nothing else to do here. And I have no income. So maybe I should put a band together and try to do this live. And that's kind of how it all sort of fell together in the last 2 years. As to, I 3 years ago, if you asked me if I'd be in a band and going out and playing shows, I'd say no. But now I am. But the point of this long, meandering story is that this all music came together in an entirely different way than NoMeansNo did, or even the Henson brothers, or the show business giants, which was incredibly diverse, fun music to play, and another outlet for just imagination and not worrying about what a song style was or anything like that. But when you come then to translate that to musicians, they didn't grow it's not organically grown out of this group of people. It's like, here's the music. Now we need to, can we learn this and play it so it kind of sounds like what it's written, which is a huge challenge, and it's a totally different approach. So this has been a big learning curve for me, and I'm singing way more, which I swore I wouldn't do. I said, next band I'm in, I'm not singing at all. I just want to play the drums. But that's not happening. Now I'm, basically the lead singer who can't lead sing everything because it's just physically impossible.
But when you develop your skills, tour around the globe, build the following, master your style, and so on, I mean, it truly becomes a part of your life. But when it stops and you suddenly find yourself running a bar or a brewery, did you switch that indicator from quote unquote musician to quote unquote businessman, or whatever you would choose?
Uh, well, sort of, whatever. You have a new project and you pour yourself into it. And personally, I like Joe jobs. Dishwashing. That's the best position in a restaurant, as far as I'm concerned. You won't get rich, but it's the best job to have. I like that kind of work. Only being a businessman is no. I'm a terrible businessman. I didn't really try to be one. I just kind of was in that position and not good at it, biding my time to do what I am good at, which is making beer. And music is, music was something that, well, this is not what I'm going to be doing. I still played here and there different things. And like I say, I still was writing music. And I did, of course, that project with Compressor Head and the Robots.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately after, when NoMeansNo was basically retiring. So I was still getting lots of my musical yayas, as they say. But whatever, you find something new in your life, and then you apply your energies to it, and so that's what I did. It's like being a musician. I am, and I am a professional musician because people pay me. But it's just that is a passion in life, and brewing beer is maybe not quite as an intense passion, but it's a passion, and I'm very happy to apply myself to that. So as far as like how I kind of switch gears, it's nothing that profound. It's just moving from one thing to another.
You've moved to your land where you are now in the Canadian forest in 2013. Am I correct?
Yep.
Yes, it's quite an existential climate, isn't it?
Well, I purchased some land up here at the end of the road back in the mid '90s. Subsequently, then had children and spent a lot of time up here recreationally. But the kids more or less grew up down in Vancouver and went to school and whatnot. And I knew I would eventually end up living here. But through circumstances, my relationship with their mother dissolved and became that sort of separated with children situation. But eventually by 2013, Vancouver was, expensive, and the kids were getting older, and it didn't make sense for me. I couldn't really afford it anymore. So I knew this place was here and I didn't have to move. The most difficult thing to do is moving further away from your kids. But in the end, it was the best for everyone, including me. And everything's fine. Everything's great. And I got to end up living where I wanted to live anyway. So, yes, it does change your life, and it is a big change. But again, it's not incredibly profound. It's just moving from one stage to the next.
I've been actually thinking that if you would look at the, at art and literature specifically, it turns out that this idea of, getting from one place to the forest land, or, I wouldn't call it escapism, but sometimes it is, right? So it turned out to be the way out for artists dealing with either crisis state or looking for something. Eventually, if you would look at people like Jackson Pollock, Walt Whitman, the Lake Poets in the UK, all of them discovered something like living close to the nature, which makes me think that after living in this sort of environment, you as a musician, you rediscovered yourself focusing on different aspects of your work, and right now came up with that Bob, which is completely incredible project to me.
Yeah, well, I agree that, nature, shall we say, has a profound effect, if you realize it or not, on everyone. And you take any child and put them out in the woods, they will feel entirely at home. And they will feel as though that is a natural place to live. If you grow up specifically never being able to experience the outdoors, quote unquote, when you get there, it's kind of frightening. But never do you feel as though you're well, of course, never, whatever. There's always exceptions. People who go, I hate this shit, and go home. But but generally speaking, people go, they feel as though they're returning to some part of themselves that is always been there, always is there. Like even just a park, like cities without parks are not the same as cities with parks. Even just going to a park, people are naturally attracted because the being in a natural or quasi natural surrounding literally brings you down to earth. And it's not as though, from my personal experience, growing up in Canada, you're never more than a half an hour away from the fucking wilderness, if you understand what I'm saying.
Sure.
Yes, you can grow up in Toronto and never leave the city limits, but that's not really how most people live in this country. And the same as me, Victoria was a totally urban, white, wealthy suburban city, white in its sort of colonial whatever history as a town. Certainly, plenty of diverse cultures in Canada and there, but you're right there. I mean, I get in the car, we go party. Oh, let's go. I'm high school. We go out to the beach or we go to a lake and we go camping, and you're nature is right there, and it's always right there. It's always in your backyard. People tourists will come to Vancouver and I'm going to go for a hike in the mountains and then never seen again. This happens every year. Like they don't realize that you just walked out into the wilderness and you can get lost. So I don't know if this is a Canadian thing, but certainly for me, being able to enjoy a natural surrounding as well as growing up and working, touring in completely urbanized settings, nightclubs, big cities, living in Vancouver for 20 years, basically. I feel really lucky to have this wide variety of experiences, traveling the world, getting out of your own country, getting out of your own fucking town. Not everyone does, and I've been extremely lucky to be able to do that. So moving here, it's not as though I was searching for something or that I stumbled across and found something. I came to an environment that I was already familiar with and knew I would end up in. And so artistically, no, it wasn't. I didn't find inspiration. I found some inspiration for other things. I found like I mentioned earlier, I like to work with wood. I'm able to bring down trees and mill them and make things right here on my property. This not it's not something new. I enjoyed this from being a child. Building, my dad go out help him hammer something together. So I'm able to revisit pleasures and experiences that I've had all my life. So then and yes, definitely. Would I move back to Vancouver? No. I'm not going to move back to Victoria. No. This is an incredible place to end up. But it is the end result of a long life of experiences, not necessarily the start of something brand new, and except that of course, whatever, moving away from my immediate family and having a new logistical arrangement with things. Um, it was really just, yeah, I knew I was going to be here. And musically, as I mentioned before, Dead Bob was the product of me out doing my own thing, but it all came afterward. So it wasn't though I had to come here to discover it. It's just I came here and then I had the opportunity.
When I discovered Dead Bob, the project, when we start, basically, as you mentioned, you decided to release it without any plan, which is why it came out as a digital release. However, once again, when I saw the name, I was thinking this might be a conceptual project, but obviously you started this project having something in your notebook. Do you have like any idea or any feeling in terms where you would love it to go to?
Dead Bob is very much a work in progress because now it is entering the realm of, a live performance. It's now, well, I'm working with other musicians, of which, of course, like Ford Pierre, for instance, I've been doing projects with him on and off for decades. And Byron Slack from the Invasives, who's on guitar, he's co-written a couple of these songs because for instance, I'm not a profound or a prolific lyricist. The biggest roadblock to completing songs because they almost always aren't strong as purely instrumental music. They're written to have words and singing. Often I have melodies and counter melodies and choruses all in my head, what it needs to be, just not necessarily the text to fill those voids. So I've collaborated with other musicians to complete things. And now I'm performing with these people. And so where does this go from here? Well, the next album is already written and almost completed. Again, just sort of mining this enormous catalog of backlog of music that I've accumulated over the years. So it's still me writing my own music and arrangements, but it can't exist that way forever. The band needs to evolve if it's going to be a band. Then that will naturally begin to evolve, and these people aren't just hired guns. Well, I have no money, so I can't pay anybody. They're there because they want to be, and we hopefully will go play shows and get paid. We'll see. Um, so this is not like, okay, this is me, and I'm going to hire people to do it for me. This is me, and I'm going to run out of music, and maybe we need to start creating stuff together. So it is, as I say, a work in progress. I'm not sure where it's going to go. The first album, this first album, Lifelike, it also kind of formed itself in these ways. First of all, it's the first collection of songs that actually got finished. Now that said, as I was getting songs finished, I could see which songs I'm already arranging in my head. Like, how does this album have to flow? Well, this one is close to done, but it doesn't fit with these ones. So I'm already arranging the album as the songs are being completed and deciding how they're going to flow, and then and lyrically they start to form a certain tone, and the album is really ends up being surprise about anxiety and my life has been full of anxiety for a while, and the world is in an uptick, shall we say, of anxiety, and so it doesn't surprise me that these songs start taking bent. Lifelike was simply a pet project of mine, the song itself. I found the old demo, my original demo for the song, which was way more of a pop song. It was always a pop song. And I thought, hey, you know what? Just for fun, I'm going to make a pop song out of this. The original NoMeansNo version was, the arrangement was somewhat flat. We weren't the right band for the song. But I always thought that it was one of my favorite collaborations with Rob as far as music and words.
Wow.
So I always thought it was really strong, the way the words and the music went together. So I just did it to do it. And then I was so pleased with it. I had this idea of it being more choral, and I wanted to be somewhat not just so male centric, with these big lifelike male voices all through it.
Sure.
And I met and befriended Selena Martin through Tom Holliston, and I thought, oh, her voice would be perfect. She's a great singer. So I just said, hey, you feel like singing this song with me? And that was done remotely. And she lives in France, I think in Marseille. And she just did that. She just sing the song here. And we tried it a couple of times back and forth. And I added my voice. We were never together at the same time. But I wanted to create that feel of non-sexually or non-gender, whatever, it's like not just male, but, and I would have, if I could have, if I had the money, that whole middle section with the choir, I would have had an actual choir sing it, some boys choir or whatever, church choir or something, you know what I'm saying?
But
I
think you've done a really great job with this specific song.
Well, thank you so much. I was also proud of it, and it went on the record only because of that, because I finished it and there it is, and I like it. It wasn't as though I'm like planning on it. When I did that song and finished it, there was no even real plan to release anything. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying before, how just songs were getting done without really thinking about being a band. And I didn't have a name. There was no Dead Bob. There was just music that I was making. So the timbre of the album, it also just evolved and formed itself as part of the process.
I think it's a great place to get into the evolution of the punk rock from the late 70s to early 80s. Right now, having your experience and, with me knowing this history a little bit, basically post-punk emerging in 78, 79, having artists like Public Image Limited overthinking the values of punk rock and coming from the same background basically, but making a different music with a different feel versus you understand there were a ton of bands who wanted to play music discharge style. I'm not saying that it's specifically bad in terms of the musical evolution, but when you have records like Sex Mat or Small Parts Related and Destroyed or Wrong, each of which is very different, but the ethics is there, even though musically it's far beyond just punk rock. So, what was your mentality like, and what pushed that transition of, let's say, we shouldn't be in this box, we should look for something which is like, once again, still what you are doing right now, and that connects that Bob, pretty good.
Yeah, Dead Bob is simply a continuation of what I've done all my life. Apart from the fact that I was simply by myself, the impetus and the inspiration and to some degree the process in my own mind is no different than when I was a teenager. So I guess it goes back to what I'm saying. We grew, like, punk rock was kind of this, DIY, do what you want. It's not, you're not, how shall we say, it's not a battle of the bands. Who's going to win? Like, who could play the best? It was about just expressing yourself. And Public Image, there you go. All those post-punk bands were huge inspirations too. Gang of Four, and these were all huge influences on us too. About just, there's such a diverse approach to this music. Don't be worried about, don't try to sound like someone. Just try to sound like yourself. Be yourself, and that's easier said than done. Of course, we managed to do it. Robbie was a great writer, is a great writer, and our musical backgrounds were very, rich and diverse. There was lots to draw from, but the idea of taking all those things and creating something new and not being afraid to follow to go where the music is leading you. And not like, oh well, we have to, it has to be this guitar sound, and it has to be, we have to have this chorus and this blah 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 here and there, and the cookie cutter approach to writing music, which is great. I mean, the Ramones, I mean, it was the same song over and over. In fact, when we played the Ramones, sometimes Robbie would get lost because he couldn't remember what song it was. Like, was this a song when it went G two times and E once, or was it the E twice in this one? And it's like, which is wonderful. I mean, the Ramones were as well a ginormous inspiration. The music was so simple and pop, you know. So it's taking all of those elements, and we never stopped doing that. I mean, I stopped being really following music. I mean, once you have kids and you're touring and then it's the process of writing. But I've already had all these I've had 20 years at that point of knowing how I'm going to or we knowing how we are going to approach our writing. So by the 2000s, I wasn't really following music too much. I mean, you'd hear it, you'd come across it, you'd see bands, but it wasn't like the 70s and early 80s where you're like looking for every new thing and very, very uh, focused on all the music that's going on. And when hip hop came around, I wasn't enthralled like I was with punk rock. I don't know why, maybe just culturally, or it didn't interest me that much. Although I remember the message, what was it, the Grandmaster Flash or whatever. Mm-hmm. We all fucking love that shit. This is great, and even that has influenced the whole idea of sampling and looping. All was influencing. It's all in everything that we continue to do. It's in my music now. So it's constantly absorbing what's around you and then trying to reform it. They say, what is it? This quote I just heard the other day. Like nobody. What was the quote? Yeah, everything's been already written. Mm. It's like all music has already been written, but it's not been written by you. So that's kind of what the magic of music, and embracing that, or not, just playing the same fucking three chords all the time for every record. If that's what you love, and if that's what people want to go and listen to, then fine, that's great. So.
I feel because of the Sid Vicious stereotype, a lot of the people portray punk rock artists in a certain negative, almost marginal way. When when did you notice that people take your creativity a bit differently? I'm talking about the situation where you, as a performer, as an artist, you feel you got the idea that your music appeals a bit more to people on a creative level versus if you're playing for punk rock audience, for the basement gigs, whatever, and obviously the climate would be quite specific.
Well, it's kind of hard to say, but as we got more popular, but also as the kind of music got more popular towards the end of the 80s and what we were doing before finally, I guess everyone says when Nirvana broke with Nevermind, that's when everything changed. And it was kind of like that, but it was peaking, like we were garnering big audiences. Like in Europe in 1990, 89, maybe 90, 91, the last couple of years with Andy, shows were getting big. Mm-hmm. And lots of people, lots of excitement. And I suppose when Andy left the band and we started touring again in 94, and suddenly, the audiences weren't as big and then kind of dissipated, then you realize that the size of audience you're playing now, those are the people that really loved you musically. The others were there because it was hip to be there. That was the thing to go do and go see. that kind of experience, that kind of concert, the type that we did. We were unique amongst them, but so there's an ebb and flow of popular music. What's cool, and a lot of people just go to shows because everyone's going to the show, and then in the end, you see the people that I've seen you 25 times. Well, that's somebody who loves your music, and they're there because they love their music, and people love our music because because it's unique and it's honest and you know it's we're just kind of who we are. There's not really a lot of pretense, and so to answer your question, it's hard, but essentially, who your fans are because they're there now. 20,
Mm-hmm.
30 years later, you got people like, oh, I'm so happy you're doing music again. And, I didn't think I'd hear you play drums again, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, we're not, and maybe Taylor Swift will always have hundreds of thousands of people love her because they do. That's that's the scale and the world she lives in. But for us, it's we've got very loyal fans, and those ones that really dig what we do musically. I think that's why they dig us, because of what we do musically. But who knows? There could be a lot of other reasons.
And also you understand, and that's probably something I realized was getting older, is that you can truly buy experience. So like if you were lucky to be on SST, Alternative Tentacles, Touch and Go, like, and people know you from it, people appreciate your music even if you aren't getting the same royalties as any of the popular these days artist does, but still there is a certain, in my opinion, there is a bigger degree of appreciation, probably because these days people understand like how much social media means. And working in PR, I understand this as well. So
Yes.
this concept of a certain music being over promoted, I think it's really taking popularity right now in a good sense.
Well, yeah. Uh, but also one thing about like having conversations with you and being asked questions about music along these lines is that you have to understand that a musician has really no concept of how people look at them, an artist. They only see it from their point of view. So like, people ask like, what is the song about? Well, you can answer that question a lot better than I can, because it doesn't matter what I think it's about. It only matters what you think it's about. The only reason your experience with the song is your experience with the song. And if you don't know what it's about, well, that doesn't matter either. It's I can't. I mean, maybe I could. Well, it sort of talked about this, or I was thinking that. But who cares what I'm thinking? The only thing that matters is how you are affected by that song, in a good way, even in a bad way. Like a negative reaction is better than no reaction at all. What do they say? Nonsense is better than no sense at all. It's uh, so often I find it odd when musicians talk about themselves like myself, like I'm doing now, because there's not a lot of insight there. The insight is to ask yourself why, if you care, why do I love this, and does it matter? You love it. That's really as far as it needs to go. You feel something from it, then that's awesome. Then the magic has happened, and sort of dissecting things afterwards doesn't doesn't it's not part of what the experience is, which is, especially live, a group experience. But what the audience is feeling and thinking and reacting is largely and dramatically different than what the band is feeling and doing. But at the same time, there is a collective recognition that this is happening and that we're all here while it's happening. Yeah, I've kind of lost why I was going in this direction in the conversation, but I just wanted to say that, the how people, like you say, like how do you distinguish those who really are appreciating the trajectory of your career, and what you did with your music, and how you weren't this and you were that. Well, it's a personal thing. I mean, in this whole book that's coming out with Jason, it was like talking about approach. And early on, I said, this whole book should not even feature us. Why am I doing an interview? What would be very interesting is to get all the stories of people who had a story about No Means No, and how they felt this way at this point, or why they liked it. That's, to me, more interesting, obviously, because I don't really, my thoughts on it are just my thoughts on it. I don't know if you catch my drift here in this tangent I'm on.
Well, I actually do, because right now I'm working on, on the similar project, an oral history, and I do ask these people all sorts of weird questions, starting with, what was the smell in your rehearsal room like, just to get the feeling, to put you, being a listener, a reader, into that situation. Even though, some people might find it strange, or whatever descriptive you would use. But I really think that in some cases it really depends on, like, how many details you are giving to people, because eventually you can give a general answer to the question, and people could still interpret your words in very different ways.
Oh, of course. I mean, there are people listening to Dead Bob that that will read into the each song, and the order of the song, and the meanings of the songs, and the significance of the artwork. They'll read in what they think, what it means to them, and that's exactly what it should do. And that's kind of my point. It's like, I could say, well, actually, when I was writing that song, I was in the middle of taking a crap, and who cares what I was doing when I was playing a song, and what were the posters on the wall, like it's really meaningless in the end. I understand what you're saying. It's like you're trying to put the humanity in, like to try to, yeah, exactly that, to put the humanity so people can imagine the humanity that's at work here, and that's great. And I think probably one of the things that people like, and what I've always wanted to be, is that, yeah, I'm not trying to pretend to be anything here. There's no real illusion. The illusion is only simply because the audience sees only the very end product, and then has to interpret it for themselves and take out of it what they either like it, or they don't, or it's okay, or it's great, or it's whatever. So and the backstory is very interesting to people. Maybe for me, like I say, uh, listening to other people's stories would be far more interesting to me than a book where I'm doing all the talking. Like,
Mm,
you know what I'm saying?
sure. But getting to that, Bob, right now you are about to get on tour, which would be like your first big tour since the end of No Means No, basically. How do you feel about this?
Nervous.
Really?
Oh yeah, there's some big shoes to fill here. There's expectation. And with No Means No, there was no expectation. Not until we were well into it and well-oiled machine. Dead Bob. Literally, we're going to play our first show, and we'll see how it goes. But the people who are showing up are going to show up expecting or hoping to see what they saw before, which was the end result of years of work of a well-oiled, like I say, musical um, entity. This is okay. Let's try to get this together, and let's try to bond, and let's try to make it work musically. So it's yeah, it's right. It's like going from 0 to 100. There's no warming up. Got to get it right the first time.
But at the same
So it's a
time,
bit nerve wracking. I'm confident, of course. Everyone I'm playing with are great musicians, and I'm still banging the drums well, and blah blah blah. But it's a bit nerve wracking, and it's also me. And it's not me and my brother and Tom or Andy. It's not. You know what I mean? It's basically me as the hangover as the no means no, as the ghost of no means no, So it's a bit nerve wracking, to be honest. But at the same time, it's exciting. And this will tell a lot of tales. The 9 shows we're playing in November in here in British Columbia will, that'll be okay. Then we can take stock. How did that all go? What was it like? Is this something that's going to work? So it's like I say, like I have said earlier on, it's a work in progress. And at this stage, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's see how things go. But we're making plans, of course. We want to get out and play down in the States, and definitely want to get back over to Europe. But we have to be a good band first, foremost. I mean, it always boils down to that. You can make all the plans in the world, but it's all got to be working.
After all your experiences, I'm talking about like compressor head of you being conductor informally, and you taking and working on most of the Dead Bob material as a conductor once again, did it give you a different set of the musical language you are using with your colleagues right now versus those situations when there was more of a collectivity?
Yeah, well, it's definitely different. And yes, it is that. It's like, okay, well, I need you to play it this way, or like, okay, we need the vocals to be sung this way. We're trying to recreate something that was created independently with a bunch of new people, as well as getting used to playing together. So yeah, it's a different animal. And you're right. I'm kind of like the conductor, but we also all really know each other as people. So it's just a matter of everyone focusing on what they have to learn and do, and then moving forward from that. But as I said early on in this conversation, that when you have when you play with somebody for so long, everyone just naturally does, well, not entirely, but you know what's going to happen. And in here, it's like, oh, well, you just added this note and you just played it this way naturally yourself, which is not the way it's written. And I have to stop and go, okay, do I want to nitpick at these little details, or do I let these natural mutations happen? So and that's the other reason of being it's a bit of an unknown and a work in progress and a little nerve wracking, because it's not familiar ground.
It seems to me like when you are doing something long enough, having this punk rock routine and also being open to the new ideas, especially when you reach out a certain age, passing through these, once again, basement gigs and so on and so on, until, the point where you are a professional musician with your punk rock background, but still it really opens new doors for you because of the ethic, because of the mentality, your attitude, which is unlike when a lot of the studied musicians would do. It's probably, I would quote John Zorn in a different way, who tells that sometimes not studied musicians come with more original ideas than those who have an academic background. How do you feel about this in terms of those ideas you've been coming with, especially even if we are talking about in the context of No Means No, because I still think that one, it's really one of the most outstanding records of yours of that era. Like, it's really great.
Well, certainly with the people I'm working with now, they all kind of come out of the same ethos, so to speak, very much so. And yes, it's a wide variety of, it's mostly DIY musicians. I think Ford has had formal training, but he's been doing it so long and doing his own thing for so long. And actually, Christy on trumpet, guitar, she's a music teacher.
Mm-hmm.
She teaches trumpet, has students and whatnot, and has a much more formal education than probably the rest of us in that respect. But she plays in her own rock and roll band, and she's a ball of energy and a force on stage, and so it is a bit of a wide variety. And yes, these people I'm working with are the people that that I really wanted to work with. And I'm really happy and feel lucky that they all are totally keen too. Like I said before, I can't, I'm not like, this is my thing and I'll just pay people to do it for me. No, they're all unique in their own way. They're all into it because they understand it and come from the same world and they're keen. And also all super talented. So when I say a work in progress, we'll see. What happens when we start writing some songs together, or I'm writing new stuff specifically for these people, and vice versa with them individually. It's sort of, we'll see where that goes.
How do you feel like when you are writing something, once again, as more as a conductor, but already knowing these people, their specific taste of playing, their approach, mentality, even though once again you mentioned mentality is pretty much the same, but when you are writing right now for these people, what is your work like? Do you give them some space to interpret things, or like, is there any communication between you and this person, that person?
More so lyrically than musically. I'm still kind of in my own head musically. I haven't written anything terribly new in the last couple of years because it's just been so much old stuff to be completed. But yes, and I frustrate myself. I've finished the newest thing I finished was recently and it's probably I think the last collaboration with my brother, in the sense that there was an old demo he did 12 years ago, 10, 12 years ago, of a song that, he demoed a bunch of different stuff. And he had this song that I really liked, the singing and the words, and the music wasn't overly thrilling me, but we never ended up getting to it and working on it. But I always really like the tone of the song and the words, and it's pretty simple, and the way he had sung a particular harmony in it, and then I was actually just testing out I rearranged stuff in my workshop and reset all the recording, my kind of really basic recording system here. And I was just kind of banging around on the drums and came up with a couple of drum patterns and started putting some music to it. So this is kind of the freshest of writing that I've done in a while. Mm-hmm. And then it dawned on me that structurally this will work with with the words and the way he sung them on this old demo. And I was like, you know what? I could probably just lift that and drop it right on this, figuratively.
And did you show your
so
idea to Rob?
What's that? Well, I said, hey, Rob, I'm stealing your words from the song and I'm making my own out of it. Okay. He doesn't care. And again, like, well, this totally worked. This is great. And of course, I do it in a way that it's like I've got two drum sets and I'm singing something that there's not a hope in hell that I could sing this and play it at the same time. So it's like I keep fucking shooting myself in the foot by writing stuff that is not really that easy to translate to a band, unless we had all learned it and practice it all together at the same time. In which case it would be different, because then it would be all this other input and all this, like, accommodating the instrumentation and accommodating what can actually be performed and sung. And it wouldn't be me singing, so the song would sound completely different. Everyone else's voice in this band is utterly different than mine or Rob. So yeah, it's like, okay, I'm trapped in these two worlds in that respect. So moving forward, yeah, the music of Dead Bob could become dramatically different once you have all these other voices coming in and the way songs are arranged and performed, because they're not just out of the thin air in my head. Mm. So it's that is a challenge. Like, how does this transition happen, and how does this writing change? And it will in some ways, but lyrically it's different. Lyrically, a couple of these songs, I mean, I'm hopefully not terribly insulting people and screwing with their work, but I'll have lyrics like, I wrote this for this song, and I'll listen to it, and then I'll start editing it and become the producer and changing things and stuff. And of course, in the end, it's like everyone's agrees on what's happened, but there's been much more of a collaborative approach lyrically more than anything else so far.
It was just announced that Wrong is getting reissued by Alternative Tentacles coming out the next year. And obviously, previously you did this with Wrong Records due to the distribution deal you wanted to get. How do you feel about getting back to Alternative Tentacles and working with this record label again?
Well, I approached Alternative Tentacles about 6 years ago. It was about 2017. I realized, okay, well, the back catalog I think needs to find a home, and I knew that the Afro would really like that, and I also felt it was very appropriate because largely NoMeansNo's success was the fact that people came to see us because we were on Alternative Tentacles. It was very old school, back when people actually would give bands a chance because they liked the label they were on, and said, well, if this label is putting this band out, there's probably something to it in that world, right? So without a doubt, our first tour in Europe, especially in 1988, which really sort of accelerated our career, for lack of a better term. Everyone who came to those shows, they didn't know who No were. They were there because we were on Alternative Tentacles. And what is Jello doing these days? And why is he putting this band out? Which again is like why, and why we were playing punk rock shows everywhere too, was that, it was a very, very well-liked and well-known independent punk rock label. So it just made sense to me we didn't have to, there's no contractual obligation to do so. And likely if I took it to another label, we'd probably make more money, to be honest and frank. But that wasn't the point. The point was that really this is, out of respect and appreciation, and that's where it should be. So was my thoughts, and that's what I initiated a long time ago. Now, it took forever for anything to happen, which was a little frustrating, but I was so busy with my life being completely absorbed up here in the pub that, I said, well, it'll all happen when it happens. And now it's happening. So, which is great. And right now, I don't know if Dead Bob is going to end up on Alternative Tentacles. We're still debating on what to do about that. I've been working with a lot of new, different, and excited people. So that might go in a different direction. Haven't made any decisions yet, but very happy to see the back catalog coming out slowly but surely. And I know there's, Wrong, of course, is sort of the default first big release. It's, as you know, it's our most popular album, without a doubt. So so awesome to see that coming out, and very happy that it is coming out where it is.
Obviously, with your plans and the activities right now, it would make some sense to ask you, do you have any plans in terms of trajectories or format of the next releases?
Many people, refer to, like, the music sounds, Dead Bob and some of the stuff is very cinematic. That's another thing I would love to explore too. If there's any listeners out there that I would love to see what it's like to try to put music to film. And I love film, and it's something. In fact, just a sidebar, during COVID when I was working on music, I also have about an album's worth of music that is not punk rock or anything like that. And because I became obsessed with writing something that sounded like a television theme.
Oh, wow.
And realized how incredibly influenced I was by 70s television themes. It really dawned on me how I arrange songs, and Carl Stalling, all those Warner Brothers cartoons as a child. Those arrangements were embedded in me somehow subconsciously. And it's just something I've come to realize in the last few years. So yeah, literally, I probably wrote about 7 things, trying to be. Well, what it was is I wanted to write a commercial for my pub. I wanted to write a theme song for it, and I did. It never got released because it just whatever. We were trying to do a video and it got shot, but never edited, and then the money all ran out anyway, so it never was completed. But yeah, I got a few little fun gems stuck away. I've got a song that, like, Where I Live is referred to as the end of the road, and to me, it's like, well, here's a fucking television program just waiting to be written. There's so many crazy characters around here. You know, the typical formula, weird town somewhere in the world. And I wrote a song, so I've already got the theme song. If somebody wants to start writing the script.
Yeah, so if anybody listening to this conversation has any ideas in terms of bringing John to write a soundtrack, he would be very interested.
I'd have a lot of fun with that. Then I could do everything in my head.